Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
My mother never raised her voice, but she could cut you clean with a sentence, like slicing through soft butter with a cold knife. That evening was no different. Her kitchen smelled like baked ham and resentment. The table was set for three, and the air was as tight as the elastic on her Sunday church gloves. Jessica was already there when I arrived, perched at the far end of the table like a queen on a throne she never had to earn. She had on one of those too tight sweaters and lip gloss that shimmered like dollar store glitter. My mother was bustling around, humming something tuneless and smiling that brittle, stretched smile she always wore when she was preparing to say something cruel wrapped in the plastic of politeness. I walked in with a bottle of red wine, not because they liked wine, but because I knew neither of them could tell a Merlot from vinegar. It gave me something to do with my hands. Something between me and the memory of being 12 and hearing my mother say, "Melissa's more of a thinker," like that was a polite way of saying I wasn't much to look at. Jessica gave me her usual once-over, half pity, half smirk, and said, "Still into thrift shops, huh?" I smiled. Not because it was funny, just because I was tired. Dinner was roasted potatoes, green beans with too much garlic, and ham that was dry in the way only my mother could manage. Conversation started with small talk, Jessica's new interior decorator, how mom's rose bushes had aphids, some nonsense about a neighbor's cat that had gotten stuck in a tree. I watched the clock above the microwave. I listened, nodded, and said just enough to not seem distant. That's how you survive in families like ours. You make yourself small, but not invisible. Then it came. Just as I reached for the salt, my mother said it like she was reciting a grocery list. "Your sister was always the beautiful one." No warning. No lead up. Just that. As calm as if she were saying the sky was blue or that water boils at 100 degrees. I didn't flinch. Didn't look up. I kept my hand moving, salted my potatoes, and took a bite. Jessica gave this little chuckle, like she was embarrassed, but pleased. You know that sound people make when they're pretending to be humble, but really they're lapping it up? That. She looked over at me like she expected me to say something. Maybe argue. Maybe cry. Maybe ask why. But I just chewed slowly, swallowed, and said, "These beans are strong." My voice didn't shake. Not even a little. Here's the thing they never figured out. Silence is not surrender. Silence is a choice. Silence is strategy. While they talked about Jessica's Pilates instructor and her new whitening toothpaste and how her ex-husband still texts her even though she's planning wedding number 3, I cleared my plate, stood up, and started gathering the dishes. My mother raised an eyebrow, probably thinking I was being dramatic. "Melissa, you don't have to clean up," she said. "Jessica's our guest." Of course she was. She'd always been the guest of honor, the golden child, the one who got the new dress while I wore hand-me-downs from a cousin who played softball and had no taste. I smiled and said I don't mind because that's what I'd been trained to say. And then I washed their dishes while they sat on their thrones and talked about their lives like I was the maid. Flashbacks aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they're just moments that creep in while you're scrubbing a casserole dish. Like the time Jessica spilled nail polish on mom's rug and blamed me. Or when I got a scholarship and mom said, "Well, Jess always struggled academically. You're lucky you're smart." That word lucky. Like effort had nothing to do with it. Like I was a coin someone flipped and it landed on plain but competent. When I was done, I dried my hands, picked up my purse, and said, "Thanks for dinner." I didn't hug them, didn't kiss them on the cheek. I walked out like a ghost with unfinished business. The air outside felt cooler than I expected. It hit my skin like a truth I'd waited too long to hear. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone. There was a notification. Just one. It was enough. I smiled for real this time. Not wide, not smug. Just a little curl at the corner of my mouth like a secret slowly unfolding. I drove off without looking back. There's something poetic about dishes being the last thing I did in that house. It felt symbolic, like wiping the last stain off a memory that had outstayed its welcome. I know what you're thinking. That I should have said something. That I should have stood up, made a scene, defended my younger self. But the truth is, that would have made it about their game. And I stopped playing years ago. I'd already set the wheels in motion, and neither of them had a clue. The invitations came on thick ivory cardstock, sealed with a wax stamp like she thought she was royalty, and I only found out about it because my mother called me to ask if I'd RSVP yet. Jessica's big day is going to be beautiful, she said, as if beauty was the only currency that ever mattered in our family. I was standing in my kitchen, still in pajamas, holding a chipped mug of coffee and staring out the window like it might offer me something better than this moment. She's getting married at the vineyard on Hollow Pine Road, my mother added, her voice high and breathy, which I knew meant she was already picturing herself in a new dress and probably a matching hat. I didn't ask who was paying. I didn't have to. That answer had always been the same. Jessica's third wedding was shaping up to be more extravagant than her first two combined, which is saying something, considering the first one had ice sculptures and the second involved live doves that shat on the cake. But this time around, she was marrying some plastic-smiled finance guy from Charleston with a boat and a house with more windows than books. Third time's the charm, Mom said, not realizing how ridiculous she sounded. Or maybe realizing it and not caring at all. I smiled politely through the phone and said, "Sounds like she's really found happiness." What I wanted to say was that Jessica had the emotional depth of a Tupperware lid and the moral compass of a broken weather vane, but why waste breath when no one's listening? After I hung up, I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, not because I didn't want it, but because I needed to do something with my hands before I threw the mug against the wall. Later that week, I was at the library, yes, an actual library, the kind with dusty corners and old women who still give you dirty looks for chewing gum. When I saw it, I wasn't even looking for anything specific. I was scrolling through a public records database when I spotted my mother's name in a probate filing dated 2 months back. My stomach tightened before my brain even caught up. I clicked, opened the file, scanned. There it was, plain as daylight under a magnifying glass, a new will, drafted and signed in March. Just after my mother's gallbladder surgery, when she was loopy from anesthesia and Jessica was visiting every day with fresh squeezed orange juice and that manipulative little smile she's been practicing since high school. The document said Jessica would be the sole inheritor of the estate, house, land, savings, jewelry, everything. I was not even mentioned. Not a single word. It was as if I'd died already, or worse, never existed at all. Jessica's second husband was married for 11 years, but that was almost 12 decades ago. She probably still thinks their anniversary was on a Tuesday. I don't know why that thought popped into my head then, but it did, and it stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon like a piece of gum on the bottom of my shoe. I didn't confront my mother. I didn't confront Jessica. That would have made it too easy for them to weep and apologize and twist the whole thing into another family tragedy where I was too sensitive and Jessica was just trying to help. No, I didn't say a word. Instead, I drove to the office of my late father's attorney, a man named Gordon Pickens who had hands like paper and a memory like an elephant with a filing cabinet. I told him I wanted to go over my father's original documents. I said it was for closure. He didn't ask questions. Gordon never asked questions unless you were under oath. He pulled the old folder from a cabinet labeled Clients, Deceased, and left me alone with it in a conference room that smelled faintly of mildew and old cologne. The first few pages were just routine, deed transfers, healthcare proxies, stuff no one cared about. Then I found the good stuff. The will. The real will. The one drafted 10 years before Dad died, notarized and witnessed, leaving the house and half the financial assets to me. Jessica was listed too, of course, because Dad was fair even when fairness wasn't deserved. But my name was there, my share clearly marked. I took photos of every page. Front, back, signature, date. I also found another document, Handwritten notes from a meeting between Dad and the lawyer, dated just a week before his stroke. In it, he wrote about concerns that Mom had been overly influenced by Jessica when it came to financial matters. "Melissa must be protected," he wrote. "She's the quiet one, but she's the one who sees everything." That line stuck with me, burned into me like a brand. I copied the files onto a USB drive I'd brought with me. It was an old thing, shaped like a hummingbird, something I'd found at a gas station years ago and kept because it made me feel lucky. That night, I lay in bed with the drive under my pillow, like a child with a secret only this one could burn a house down without striking a single match. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark, "You've made your choices. Now you'll live with mine." By the time the news broke, I had already cleaned my kitchen twice and baked a peach cobbler I didn't even want to eat. The story was short, barely a few paragraphs buried halfway down the local paper's website, but the headline had Jessica's full name in it: Jessica Elaine Whitmore under investigation for misappropriation of funds from ex-spouse business. It didn't say the word embezzlement, but anyone with a functioning brain could read between the lines. I stared at the screen for a long minute, then closed the laptop with a soft click, like I was sealing a coffin. I didn't need the credit. In fact, I preferred the silence. That's always been my edge, the space between what people expect from me and what I'm actually doing when they're not watching. It took me 3 weeks to track down the right documents, and another 2 to slip them to a freelance reporter under the name Margaret Kay, which just happened to be the middle and maiden names of my mother. It wasn't just about revenge, although, God, that part was sweet. It was about exposure. It was about precision. It was about pressing a finger into a wound and watching it burst open without lifting a knife. Jessica's ex-husband, Gary, had always been a bit of a weasel, but he kept meticulous records. Bank transfers labeled consulting with no proof of service, expenses for vacations Jessica claimed were business retreats, and one particularly damning wire labeled interior redesign. That was actually just a cash withdrawal to fund her little weekend spa habit. All of it was just sitting in a PDF folder on a hard drive that hadn't been accessed in years. All it took was the right nudge, the right hands, and the right amount of plausible deniability. When I sent the documents, I made sure to do it on a public Wi-Fi signal, no login, no account, just a folder titled Domestic Fraud, Charleston, with a timestamp and nothing else. A clean drop. No fingerprints. By the time the story went live, it had already been passed through 3 different email accounts and 2 journalists. No one knew where it started. That was the point. I wanted her to look around and realize that nowhere was safe. I wanted her to feel the cracks forming under her feet and have no clue where the first one came from. The day after it ran, I sent Mom a bouquet of hydrangeas, white, with tiny blue accents, her favorite, along with a little note that simply read, "From the less beautiful daughter, hope these help with the stress." I imagined her reading that note, standing in her sunlit foyer with her manicured fingers clutching the card like it might bite her, and for a moment, I felt something almost close to peace. She didn't call. Of course she didn't. She probably thought it was a joke or some sort of twisted apology. My mother has always been too proud to admit when the walls are closing in, too invested in the illusion of control. She'd rather pretend the house isn't on fire than admit she lit the match. Later that night, as I sat in the living room sipping cold tea and listening to the hum of my ancient refrigerator, I remembered something from high school that hadn't crossed my mind in years. I was 16, and Jessica had come into my room to borrow a pair of earrings, the only nice pair I had, a gift from an aunt who actually liked me. When she didn't find them, she got bored and grabbed my hand mirror, a cheap thing with a painted wooden handle and a crack in the corner I'd patched with glitter nail polish. I watched her drop it, casually, almost lazily, and when it shattered on my carpet, she turned to me with wide, wet eyes and said, "Why did you throw it at me?" My mother believed her, of course. Always did. I was grounded for a week. Jessica cried for 5 minutes, then went out with her boyfriend, leaving me to pick the shards out of my floor barefoot. I didn't forget. Not the sound of glass, not the way it caught the light, and definitely not the look on her face when she realized she'd gotten away with it again. The phone rang just before midnight. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me knew exactly who it was before I even answered. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through seconds later, thin and cracked, the Jessica no one else ever saw. "Melissa, did you do this to me?" I played it 3 times, each time a little louder. Then I pressed delete, leaned back into the couch, and smiled like I was finally home. My mother turned 72 on a Sunday, so hot it felt like the sun had peeled up the corners of the town and let everything inside it sweat and steam. The kind of heat that sticks to your back like guilt and makes even air-conditioned rooms feel like confessionals. I hadn't planned on going to the party, and I certainly hadn't been invited, but that morning I woke up calm and clear-eyed, like something had settled inside me overnight. Not peace exactly, closer to inevitability. The kind of stillness you feel before you throw a match into a field of dry grass. I got dressed slowly, choosing my outfit with the care of someone heading into a courtroom or a funeral, something quiet, understated, but sharp enough that no one would mistake me for a shadow. I didn't bother to call ahead. I knew the house would be full. I knew Jessica would be there, likely floating through the living room in some gauzy dress, smiling for photos and telling stories that made her look better than she was. And I knew my mother would be sitting on that same cream-colored sofa she's refused to replace for 30 years, surrounded by people who only loved her when the cake was being served. When I walked through the door, the room actually paused, just for a breath. People turned like pages flipping in a stiff wind. Jessica's face dropped for a split second before she caught it and shoved the smile back on, but I saw it, the flicker of dread, that flash of recognition that something was coming and she didn't know from where. Mom stood up, arms half open, lips tight as a purse string. "Melissa," she said like a question, like I was the one who owed her an explanation for existing. I smiled and held out the gift. It wasn't wrapped in bright paper or ribbon, just a plain black scrapbook with a gold clasp, the kind people used for baby books or weddings. "I made you something," I said, my voice even, almost gentle. "Thought it might help you remember." She took it, wary, confused, flipping open the cover as guests leaned in, curious as crows circling something they can't decide is dead or just playing possum. The first page was a photo of the 2 of us, me and Mom, circa 1988. I was holding a homemade Mother's Day card with crooked hearts and glue stains. She was looking at Jessica, who was off camera, mid-laugh. You could already see the gap in focus. On the next page, I'd taped my pediatric therapist's report from 1992. Notes in neat handwriting read, "Patient displays signs of emotional neglect. Reports feeling invisible." Beside it, a receipt from Jessica's private math tutor, paid in full. I'd circled the date, same year I failed algebra with no one noticing. Page after page was like that. Hospital records with no follow-up, school awards with no audience, birthday invitations that were lost in the mail. I'd layered in emails printed out and highlighted, receipts showing how Mom had loaned Jessica thousands of dollars over the years, even while I was drowning in student loan debt. Tucked into the middle was a Christmas card Jessica had written, referring to me as Melancholy Mel, which Mom had laughed at, circled in pen, and mailed anyway. The murmur started softly, like a rustle through tall grass. A cousin leaned in to get a better look. Someone at the snack table gasped. Mom kept flipping, her mouth opening and closing like a fish caught on dry land. I stood still, watching her fingers tremble with each page, like she might find a way to shake the truth loose if she just turned fast enough. Then she got to the final page. A photo of me and Dad in his workshop, taken 6 months before he died. We were laughing. My hair was messy, his hands stained with oil and sawdust. Behind us, barely visible on the desk, sat the folder with his original will marked and notarized, the one that left everything to me. Not because I asked. Not because I begged. but because he saw the storm coming and tried to leave me shelter. Jessica moved first. She reached for the glass in her hand, wine sloshing over the rim. Her voice was high and shrill, a note I hadn't heard in years. "You manipulative bitch," she hissed, then launched herself across the room, arm raised like she thought she could erase the past with one broken stem of crystal. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching her come, my body cold as marble, steady as stone. And then, just before the glass reached me, everything went black. The morning sun cut through the trees behind the house like a scalpel, slicing light into pieces across the yard where the grass had long since surrendered to patches of brown and dying weeds. Nancy was already awake, though she hadn't slept. Her birthday party had ended in what could only be described as a slow-burning catastrophe, Jessica screaming, guests shuffling out with sideways glances, the room thick with embarrassment no one dared name. The glass hadn't hit Melissa, but it had shattered on the hardwood floor and scattered silence like confetti. When Nancy stepped outside to collect the morning mail, her hands were still shaking just slightly, though she would never admit it to herself, let alone to someone else. She opened the creaking mailbox and inside, sitting atop a bundle of catalogs and a water bill, was a small padded envelope with no name, no return address, only one thing written across it in neat, sharp letters: Hummingbird. There was no note, no explanation, but the weight of it felt undeniable. She took it inside, set the rest of the mail on the hallway table, and walked straight to the living room, where she inserted the flash drive into the old laptop she mostly used to order skincare products and watch reruns of courtroom shows. The folder opened immediately. No password, no tricks. Just one video file, time-stamped and labeled like it belonged in an evidence locker. The cursor hovered a long second before she double-clicked. It opened to grainy footage, clearly from a hidden camera, and for the first few seconds, she didn't understand what she was looking at. But then she saw it, the living room, her living room, just 2 years earlier. The same beige walls, the same stiff throw pillows Jessica had picked out, and in the center, sitting on the couch with wine glasses in hand, were herself and Jessica, laughing. Not giggling. Not warm, happy laughter. This was mean, pointed, cruel. Nancy watched, horrified, as her own voice came out of the speakers like someone else's, high and sharp. "She's always been like a piece of furniture you forget is even there." Then Jessica chimed in, giggling and snorting, "At least furniture has a use." More laughter. More wine being poured. Nancy's stomach turned cold as the screen flickered, showing another clip, this one darker, quieter. They were sitting at the kitchen table. Jessica had a pen in her hand and a folder open before her. Nancy leaned in, squinting at a document. "You sure this version's better?" she heard herself ask. "Trust me," Jessica replied, voice dripping with confidence. "You're just cleaning things up. Melissa won't even know she was ever on it." Nancy's breath caught. She hit pause, but her finger trembled on the mouse. Then she pressed play again, unable to stop watching herself become someone she didn't recognize. Another clip played, this one after the funeral, with both women laughing through fake tears, Jessica saying, I barely cried, but Melissa just stood there like a scarecrow, and Nancy replying, she never was very expressive. No wonder nobody ever married her. Nancy sat frozen, every word she'd spoken ricocheting back at her like glass shards in reverse. The footage kept rolling. Conversations she didn't remember. Remarks she thought she'd whispered. Truths she never intended to be heard. And all of it, every second, caught on that damn Hummingbird drive like it had been waiting for the exact moment to explode. The laptop slid from her lap and hit the carpet with a dull thud, but the screen remained lit, the frozen frame showing Melissa in the background of one shot, almost like a ghost. Nancy doubled over, breathing like she'd just run a mile, one hand pressed to her chest, the other gripping the armrest like it might stop her from falling deeper into the pit opening inside her. For the first time in years, she thought of her husband, the real Will, the things she never told anyone, and how easily she'd let Jessica carry her along like a river sweeping trash into the bay. Meanwhile, across town, Jessica had been taken into custody that morning by financial crimes officers after documents were submitted anonymously through a third party. Her mugshot would make the rounds by evening, eyeliner smudged, hair wild, eyes somewhere between fury and disbelief. She used her one phone call to ring their mother, but Nancy didn't answer. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Melissa, on the other hand, was nowhere near town. She was sitting barefoot on the porch of a small beach rental 2 counties away, the sea wind catching her hair, a glass of cheap red wine in her hand. In front of her was a hummingbird feeder, and one of the tiny birds hovered nearby, wings beating so fast they looked like a blur, almost like rage in motion. She took a slow sip and smiled, not wide, not wicked, just the kind of smile that comes from knowing you no longer owe anyone your silence. She hadn't returned her mother's call the night before. She hadn't replied to Jessica's screaming voicemail, filled with curses and half-threats, begging to know how, when, why. She wouldn't answer. Not now. Not ever. Not because she was cruel. Because she was finished. The thing no one tells you is that revenge rarely looks like fireworks or shattered dishes. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's so quiet, it echoes louder than any scream ever could. They always said silence was golden. Turns out, it's also the loudest scream. And as the sky turned a dusky purple, the sun dipping behind the waves in a slow bow, Melissa whispered the words she'd been holding onto for decades, almost like a prayer or a confession. Maybe I went too far. Or maybe I finally went far enough. You tell me.